Awesome. Is progress perfect. Awesome. So here you go. And do we need more chairs or not?
That we might need a few more chairs.
Okay, I'm just
More
gonna
people show up.
bring some.
Yes,
Thank you.
So I'm ready. Do you want me to just start or do you wish to perform an introduction for me?
Yes. I'm gonna go back there to things started for you and I want to pay the meeting. Okay, everyone. So excited about having Warren Tanner's tuition system. Warren, and he's going to tell you about his experience with Indian music, but he's definitely one of the most important, authentic practitioners of this style in North America, and someone who has lived in India, so he's like really coming from the tradition, and he's like coming from like a performance practice and not some kind of musicology or academic background. So that makes it, I would say, a bit different, and you will see why. And so, thank you so much. It's an honor.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Let me close it down.
So being here at New England Conservatory, one of the things that you're used to is attending lecture demonstrations where people will stand in front of you and explain things in a knowledgeable way. So this is a lecture demonstration, but I'm going to start by doing some singing. And I'm going to sing a couple of different pieces so that you get a picture of some of the range of things that we're working with. And then we'll break some of them down. And I would like all of you to listen really closely to what I do when I sing, and then tell me something that you observe. Tell me something that you noticed about the music that I made. Now I'm going to begin by doing something that's actually quite unusual. The repertoire of North Indian classical music, so-called Hindustani music, the primary repertoire element is the raga. The raga, people learn the melodic behavior of different ragas. They learn songs in ragas. They study the nuances of different ragas. When I identify myself to someone, they will say, "What is your favorite raga?" Or "What raga did so-and-so sing?" So the word raga in this context just means the basic repertoire element. And we're going to get into more detail very shortly. I'm going to sing you a short song with a few associated improvisations in one of the most unusual and most uncommonly performed ragas in the North Indian system. Okay? This is very unusual. Normally, I would start and I would do something that would be guaranteed to be completely accessible to everybody. But instead, I'm going to give you something that's really out on a limb. Okay? I'd like you all to listen carefully and tell me some of what you notice. All right? So the first thing, everything is done against a drone. Typically in concert, these would be performed by people on large stringed instruments. Coming in on the subway and the shuttle bus, I didn't have room for a large stringed instrument, so I use an iPhone app and my portable speaker. Sorry about the compromised authenticity. All right, everybody ready? Here we go. This is a short alap and a khyal, the song form in the Hindustani raga Malashri.
Warren, can you ask a question?
Yes, but preferably wait until I'm finished singing. And then
They just don't know what it's about.
I'm going to show you. Ah, 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 Daras mohe chatur pujan kar. Daras mohe chatur pujan kar. Chakra daras mohe chatur pujan. Ah, 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 daras mohe chatur pujan. Ah, 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 chatur bujai mohe chatur Pitambar sohe dambar pitambar sohe kale motiyan mohe jai.
The term around that we were going over a major chord.
Okay, so, and I want everyone to just notice something here. No matter what someone says, it's always a good observation. Yes, as you said, the terms are wrong.
Yeah.
Because in the West, when you hear ba 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 ba, we say, oh, a major triad. And it's in C. For those of us with absolute pitch, it's a C major triad. Hindustani musicians don't think of it as a chord, they think of it as a scale. It's a scale with only 3 notes in it. And so this is the first thing that we learn to adjust to, is the idea that any collection of notes in ascending and descending order is a scale. Motion by chord or arpeggiated motion is not perceived as such in the realm of Hindustani music. It doesn't have harmonic implications. So you notice, for example, I didn't modulate. I didn't go to the 4 chord or the 5 chord or the 2 minor chord or anywhere. I just stayed inside those same 3 notes. Now, I want to put this out here for your consideration. There's lots more observations that you're going to make and I'm going to collect from you. But I want you to remember what I said at the very beginning, which is that this is one of the most rare and unusual items to be performed. It is not a common part of concert repertoire. Why? Because it is considered very difficult. And the reason that it's considered difficult is that it's an extremely minimal scale. And so trying to find interesting stuff to do inside it is a matter of great, you have to spend a lot of time thinking about it in order to get stuff that comes out that's interesting. So now I know from watching you and how you were watching and listening to me that you observed more stuff. Tell me something else that you observed. Yes.
Same way that you mentioned this idea of musical structure.
Yes.
I think both times when you started just on pure sounds, none with the syllables.
Yes.
Started very simple manner with the tones.
Yes.
The sustained and then kind of these plasmas between the two, and
Yep.
then not until later that you heard and changing the octave.
Right. And what you point out there is, and this is something, the minute that I give you a term or a shape for this, you'll go, oh, okay, that makes perfect sense. There are a few basic ideas, core principles in Hindustani musical aesthetics, and you have put your finger on one of them. And I'm going to write it out. It has an acronym. The acronym is EDIOT, EDIOT, which stands for Event Density Increases over time. The event density increases over time. An event is anything that attracts the attention of a listener. You hear someone do something, you go, oh, that's an event. And in the beginning of all Hindustani performances, there are very few events. There's a drone, and then there might be one note happening, and it happens for a long time, and then another note happens. And in cases where we have the full length of time for a performance to present, it might take as long as an hour to introduce all the notes inside an octave and a half. And then over the course of a performance, the amount of activity increases steadily. It's also true inside improvisations. It is by far more common for someone to start off an improvisation slow and relaxed and then get more and more wiggly as it goes along and then finally get really, really wiggly before it resolves. So what you noticed was a core aesthetic principle, one of the basic fundamental continuities that exist in Hindustani music in all performances. If you attend a Hindustani performance and the event density does not increase over time, the elderly listeners in the front row will be going, not good. No, not good. It wasn't correct. And they'll say things like, the development was rushed. The music did not have a chance to grow. The music was disproportionate. They'll say things like that. So, someone else. Lots of other things that you noticed. Yes.
Early, especially in the section of with words.
Yes.
Did you approach it like with anything other than ornament, some sort of like pitch slide or some sort of like ornamental addition?
Absolutely.
Some sort of like melismatic approach to the note.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is another thing that I think is key towards an understanding of Hindustani musical aesthetics generally, which is the idea, come on in, which is the idea that Hindustani musicians think of music as curves in space. That is, notes are verbs. Notes are processes of approaching and going away from, as opposed to fixed objects. No one in the Indian musical world says, oh, you have to hold a note. Notes aren't things that you hold any more than you can hold a cloud or hold the wind or hold a stream. So we use instead metaphors and analogies of motion. And even, and it's harder to notice when you're hearing song text, but even the song text, Dije darasa mohe chatura bhujan kara shanka chakra gada madara kara. All of the syllables are subject to ornament. And in fact, the rare times when a singer is going along and they're presenting the piece in its usual highly ornamented fashion, and then they'll do once DJ without ornamentation, people respond to it as if it's this great novelty. And sometimes the audience members go, oh, that was clever. But too much of that thing is, again, unidiomatic. So the repertoire of raga is construed as a set of curves, ascending curves and descending curves that have varying degrees of complexity. There's another thing that goes along with that. Everybody noticed, I saw you watching me, were my hands still while I was singing? No, my hands were going on like this. I remember talking to a senior musician in Mumbai in the late 1990s about hand motion. And he told me about a singer of the earlier generation, someone whose career peaked around 1960. And he said, well, you know, when he got older, he lost his upper register. He couldn't sing high notes anymore, but he went on and continued to do concerts. And when he would get to the spot where he would go into the upper register, he would just do the motion with his hands while not singing. And then when he finished the gesture, he'd rejoin his hand. And the audience members didn't even really notice that he wasn't singing. They just took his hand motion and turned it into melody in their minds. Which I think is like, how cool is that? So There have, in all of the concerts of Hindustani music that I have ever seen, and I have attended hundreds and hundreds of concerts, I have seen two musicians who did not use their hands to illuminate the gestural content of musical passages, and both of them were blind. Everybody else, some people do this. And other people go, There are some people who are renowned for extravagant gestures and other people whose gestures are very minimal, but they're always there. So what we had in this item is just the absolute minimum of material that you can have and create a song, create a meaningful musical structure. Now, we don't have enough time for me to get into all of the details of Hindustani musical structure in the rhythmic area as well as the melodic area. But instead, what I'm going to do is just open up one more fundamental musical principle. And this one again comes with an acronym. It's not an easily pronounceable acronym. It's just return to the familiar. Hindustani songs are used as the anchoring point for improvisation. And there's one phrase in the song which gets used both as the starting point for an improvisation and the ending point for an improvisation. In the case of this particular song, it's the lick that goes, so I finish an improvisation by doing that. And inside that, there's one beat, which is the most important beat. And that is the beat that goes, that is the central beat of the song. Observe. I'm going to speed up the tempo a little bit. Daras mohe chatura bhujana daras mohe chatura bhujana kar chatura bhujana daras mohe chatura bhujana kar So as you are listening to a Hindustani performance, one of the ways to listen to it is to listen for a single repeated phrase, both text and melody phrase, that seems to always occur in the same spot in the rhythm. And that is a universal structural feature of all song and instrumental repertoire that's performed with rhythmic accompaniment. There will always be a single phrase that either starts at or resolves to an important beat in the rhythm. The word for that phrase, this won't be on the test, is the mukra. Mukra literally means the face of the song. And songs are identified by the words in their face. So that particular song is a song in Raga Malashri, DJ Darasa Mohe Chatura Bhujanakar. It's a devotional text in praise of Lord Shiva. But in this realm, the meaning of the text is relatively low priority in terms of the musical explication of things. Now, I'm going to add two notes to this major triad. And what we will come up with is one of the most popular ragas in the Hindustani repertoire. And then I'm going to take you on a little tour. And what I would like you to do is, I want you to do two things. I'd like everyone to come up with a question or an observation to make. Because the more observations you make, the more chance I have of explaining cool stuff that I do. And this music is so cool that I want to share it. And the second thing is that if you hear me do something and you like it, like, oh, cool lip, I want you to say something like, yeah, or wow, or oh. And if you hear me do something and you think, geez, that sucks, just like look down at the floor and pretend you didn't hear it. Okay? जब से तुम संग लाए, जब से जब से तुम संग जब से तुम संग लाए, जब से तुम संग जब से तुम संग लाए, जब जब से All right, so then tell me something that you observed. Lots of people observe stuff. I'm watching you. I know you observed something. What'd you hear?
During the middle, you're like talking to us. Yeah, there are some small phrases.
Yes,
That
I was using the solfege syllables. Sa re ga, sa re ga pa, sa re ga pa da pa, da da ba da pa pa da. And that is very, very common in Hindustani performances. Sometimes the singer will go sa re ga ga re ga pa as a way of almost explaining what they just did. And sometimes it's just taken on as it's almost like scat singing in Western in jazz. And there are some singers who are known as virtuoso performers using the solfege syllables. And so that adds a different kind of rhythmic impetus to it. And the solfege syllables are also used in teaching very extensively. So when I was studying with my teacher in India, he would explain, now in this raga, this re is used with this type of ornament, and it is sung like this, and the ga is here, and he would demonstrate using the names of the notes, and frequently lessons would go on, in some cases, for up to 4 hours back and forth using those syllables. So if you decided to take lessons with me, you would sit down like this, and I would sing something, and you would sing it back, and we'd go back and forth. And what my teacher did, he would sing a phrase, and then I would sing it back. And if he wasn't satisfied with how I sang it, he'd sing it again. And in the beginning, sometimes he'd have to sing it 50 or 60 or 70 or 100 or 150 or 200 times before I got it. And then he'd go, huh, very good. And then he would add 2 notes. And then I go, oh, fuck. and then I'd have to get it with the 2 notes. And then he'd do that. And then he'd go, very good. And then he'd add 2 more notes. And then he'd sing the original phrase plus the 2-note added phrase plus the 2-note plus 2-note added phrase. And now it was this thing that was really long, and I would have to get it. And then I would get that, and he'd go, huh, very good. And then he'd sing it backwards. And I go, what? And I would, later on, when he allowed me to record, I would make the notation of it. And sometimes I would go to him and say, you know that the second part of that is the same thing, but backwards. And he'd go, what? He had no idea. That was just his natural way of thinking, was he generated musical palindromes without thinking, which was pretty amazing. This very deep kind of organic musicality that really, it was an extraordinary experience to spend 4-hour daily lessons for years with this man. Someone else, tell me something that you observed. I'm going to keep tossing repertoire at you. Yes, Shaleka.
I love the RTCF.
Yes.
And I also love that you kind of be classical, kind of like the natural 6/4 a little bit. You set it up and then you went down, you went up, that kind of sound to go back to the community, but also in one part of your solfege, you use your hand like you were talking about, but you totally with the sound. The sound kind of what we do in our class, foil.
Mm-hmm.
You and the actual sound.
Yeah.
Well, you I think you were going so fast, and it actually sounded like aesthetically a foil panel going.
Yes.
Actual the sound of wind instead of the sound of sound.
There are some singers who do that with so much force that it gives listeners the feeling that they're in a thunderstorm.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It is. It's really amazing. Yeah. Anybody else got an observation you want to make? Anybody else you want to, anything you notice that you want to share? Don't be shy. Yes,
Sometimes when you went higher and higher, you're in these very strong accents with certain notes.
yes. Hindustani rhythm is what is called, in the Western analytical sense, it's called an additive system. There is a recurring rhythmic cycle, which is outlined by the drums. And then on top of that, we make patterns of varying lengths that eventually resolve to an important beat. And so when I'm singing either with text or with an open vowel, one of the best ways to create musical interest is to, in a stream of melismatic notes, to take some and give them an extra shove. And I remember this shock of recognition. I was on a bus, an intercity bus, or a bus between cities in India, and we stopped at a little village where there was like a tea stand and stuff, and everybody got out, and there was a little kid from the village who was playing, and it's a very common children's activity in India. They have a wooden hoop, like a wheel, and they chase after it with a stick that has a nail in it, and they just like give the wheel a little push, and it bounces and it rolls along. And I looked at that and I went, and it was like exactly, it translated itself immediately into melody in my mind. That type of motion, this free motion with intermittent push accents. And so one of the things that I think is very important to internalize is that in some way, all music reflects the culture that it comes from, not just the culture of the musicians and where they sit, but every aspect of the culture. And in a culture where kids run after hoops with irregular push accents that make the hoop climb up and down stairs and over hills, that those gestural intentions find their way into the music because it's all part of the same basic cultural atmosphere, the same basic cultural DNA. I'm not trying to be reductive. I'm just suggesting that the way that this music emerges is as a manifestation of some of these same kinetic impulses that everybody grows up with. And that's how you recognize that it's natural. Yes.
I notice kind of like the event density increases over time in both vlogs so far. There's also been like an increase of like pitch,
Range.
like range, yeah.
Yeah, range.
So and especially that like kind of near the peak or climax of
When you get to the end, yeah.
yeah, there's like a kind of a really large range that goes up like rather high.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if generally speaking, there's a rule where there is like inclined pitches and rise.
Yes.
Or maybe sometimes they say.
The answer is yes. Almost invariably, the melodic motion will go up and expand upward. In some cases, there are ragas which have strong emphasis in the lower register, and even those, there will be an initial period of development that will open up the lower register, and then it will expand upward as well. And structurally, the songs have two parts. The first part, you heard me go, Jabba se to mi sanga la gali. And then I sang another line, which was part of that section. That is the first half of the song. That is, again, this won't be on the test, but that part is called the astai. The second half goes into the upper register, and it provides a second hook to open up improvisation in the upper register, and that is called the antara. And sometimes musicians will say, do you know full astai antara? Meaning, do you know the complete song? And that would be a criticism, like so-and-so has been studying for 8 years, but still he does not know the antara. And that suggests that this is a person who really needs to do some homework. So it is also generally understood and recognized that First, you do improvisation on the astai, which keeps you in the middle and lower registers. Then as you climb up, you open the upper register, and then you do the antara, which allows you to do improvisation in the upper register. And then when you have finished presenting the antara, you go back to the astai. Typically, you speed up a little bit, and that is when you get an opportunity to show off. If you show off in an undignified, egomaniacal, look at me, look at me, look at me fashion before you're finished with the antara, that is considered bad manners. But after you have finished the antara, you can do anything you want. Show off. Time to strut your stuff. So that is where the musicians with deep emotional and ego investment in virtuoso performance will show off how fast, how high, how loud, how tricky they can sing. Depending on how much taste you have for that kind of stuff, you may choose to shut down. Some elder audience members simply leave at that point. And they say, I don't need to hear someone practice. But on the other hand, the youngsters in the audience are all like, yeah, that's fast. Go faster, faster, faster. The fastest I've ever heard rhythmic accompaniment on this is metronome 700, which is really fast. The slowest I've ever heard anyone singing in this idiom is metronome 10. That's a really wide range. Metronome 10, with a rhythmic cycle of 14 beats, it's almost 2 minutes from one downbeat to the next. Which is basically like, it's enough time, you hit the downbeat, and then you improvise, and it's like enough time to get married and have a kid and send the kid to school, and then the downbeat comes thonk, you know? And so that's known as, some musicians refer to that, Maran Lai. Lai is tempo, and Maran means, basically that phrase translates as the tempo of death. Okay, so now this particular song that I just did is called Bhupali. And it's a major pentatonic scale. But before I go on to other scales, everybody hang on tight, because just because it's a major pentatonic scale doesn't mean that it's Bhupali. You can take the exact same notes, and if you sing them differently, you wind up getting a different raga. Here is the mood of Bhupali. So that mood, the emotional quality of that melody is described as being very peaceful, very calm, having a kind of serene, devotional atmosphere, sometimes infused with compassion and romantic yearning. Now, here's another raga that uses the exact same notes. Janana janana baje janana janana Baje, janana, janana, baje, 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 janana, baje. So same notes, but a very different mood. If this is considered to have a lively, fickle, sort of frequently changing, more youthful mood, as opposed to a serene, calm, dignified. This is more like, and this song is also, this raga is also meant for performance in the morning as opposed to in the evening. Bhupali is meant for performance in the evening. This raga is called Deshkar, and it is meant for performance in the morning. Same notes, different vibe. Now here is yet another. I'm not going to sing a song in this one. I'm just going to demonstrate by adding two small touches. I want you to listen and tell me if you can hear where those touches are. By adding two small touches, I change Bhupali into something different. What did I do? Anybody hear it? Somebody. Now see, yeah, but you got to listen even closer to that. Listen to what's happening around the tonic and the fifth when they're going down. Ah, you don't get those notes explicitly. Da da da. Ah. The idea is you just give him a brief glance as you go by. Ah. And it totally changes the mood yet again by adding these tiny, tiny grace notes of the natural seven and the sharp four. You get yet another raga. And this is one of the common features in the Hindustani repertoire, is that a raga is not the same thing as a scale. I'm going to make an analogy here. Does anybody here enjoy baking? Okay, so one of the things, the difference between a pound cake and an angel food cake, it's the same ingredients in the same proportion, but when and how you mix the butter with the sugar completely changes the way that the batter works. And it gives you, in one case, a heavy, delicious cake, and in the other case, a light, delicious cake. So the scale is the list of ingredients. The raga is the recipe and the meal. So by changing the way that you work with that list of ingredients, what order you prepare things in, how much energy you put into this part of the process versus that part of the process, and what special touches you add, it changes from one raga to another. Now, if I take this basic pentatonic scale, sa re ga pa da sa da pa ga re sa, there's an entire family of ragas, or a loose clan of pentatonic ragas that emerge just by changing the notes. So if I take the third And instead of doing a major third, I do a minor third, I get this scale. Sa re ga pa da sa da pa ga re sa. Sa da sa re ga. It gives you this beautiful unstable tritone between da ga, and it gives it a whole lot of juice. And jazz players really like working on this scale because of that. Sa da sa re ga pa da pa ga re sa da sa re ga pa da sa da pa ga pa ga da sa ye mana le Vina Bajai Krishna You don't need to know all the names of these. This is not like me showing off repertoire. I want you to hear these as mood qualities. When we add that minor third, suddenly there's a source of interesting tension and playfulness inside it. And it gets unexpectedly romantic at points and unexpectedly strange and twisted and difficult in other points. And the melodies that come out have a very strong iconic quality. Now let's take that minor third and let's apply the same idea to the second and the sixth. So we now have what is sometimes called a Phrygian pentatonic. Sa re do pa da sa da pa da. Sa re ga da pa da pa da pa da. Ga pa da da sa sa re ga pa ga re ga sa da da pa ga pa da pa ga pa da. Total vibe in that, right? So means difficulties, suffering. Mushkil karo asana Prabhu mere. It means, oh Lord, make my difficulties easier. Give me a break, huh? Again, just by taking that major pentatonic scale and lowering the second, third, and sixth, we wind up getting a completely different vibe, and one that has this very deep sense of sorrow and supplication. Now, if I take the third of that scale and I move it up by a semitone, so we now have a major third with a flattened second and a flattened sixth, we get this. Hang on, switch rhythms for you. So that again, I'm not giving you the names of the ragas because that's not important. It's just words about words. The important thing is that when you enter this musical ecosystem, one of the ways that you're offered variety is in the form of these pentatonic scales, which then proceed, but just by changing one note, you create a totally different set of mood possibilities. Let's go back to our original song. All right. And now I'm going to change one of the notes entirely from being a third to being a fourth. Now, immediately in Western terms, you get into an interesting conundrum because the vibe of the scale is undeniably major, but there's no third. Is it a major scale or not? It definitely feels major. So one of the things that we find very frequently is that Western concepts of major or minor tonality no longer have application inside here. And instead, what you have is a particular kind of mood flavor that emerges from the scale as it is performed, from the scale as it is turned into a raga. This is called, this raga is called Durga. It's another one of the very popular ones. Interestingly, it's considered less profound than Bhupali. Just by changing one note from the third to the fourth, you move from being a very deep, profound raga that is understood to be performable for 2 hours without running out of ideas, to a raga that most people say, you do Durga, you're finished in 20 minutes. That's just the way it is. Here you go. I'm going to sing you a song. This one's in a 10-beat rhythm. Nine, 10. Now I know you're just getting this kind of whirlwind tour of these different moods. Let's just stop for a second. And I've got plenty more things to share with you, but I'm curious. Tell me some things that you've noticed. Do you have questions? Yes.
Space in between phrases.
Mm.
Is there a reason for that, or are there different thoughts?
Part of it is that I have a sort of pedagogical urgency to try and get stuff, to try and cram as much stuff in as possible. But the other part of it is that by and large, the Indian musical aesthetic is maximalist. The Indian musicians really like to have a fully saturated surface. So the drone continues between songs. The drone players don't stop playing. The drone continues while people are making announcements. There are melodic accompanists who will duplicate the singer's melodies and fill up all the empty spaces. So the whole idea of like a Miles Davis kind of emptiness being an aesthetic value is really, that's considered to be very unusual. There are a few singers who were known for leaving big spaces. And to the, like one of them died like 40 years ago, and people are still arguing about whether what he did was valid or not inside the context of the music. So that's an extremely perceptive observation. And as I said, it has two things. One is that I just want to share as much as I can. And the other is that this music does have a sense of continuous invention. And the idea is somehow that the river is just going to keep on flowing. Yes.
So there's no direct one-to-one at all, really, between the way we typically think about metering and the way that like Rog's organized. But is there some similarity between the way in which we might hear like a minor mode or kind of that and the way that
The idea of the emotional connotations?
Yeah, the emotional-
No, there are plenty of minor modes which are considered to have moods of exuberant joy. And there are major scales which are considered to be filled with compassion and sadness and romantic yearning.
is there an example that comes to? I'm just wondering.
Oh, well, I'm gonna dole them out shortly. Now, before we leave the pentatonic realm entirely, because we're gonna get into some more advanced 6, 7, 8, 9 note scales. One of the things that happens is that a scale can be created which has notationally speaking, in the sense of which notation syllables, which solfege syllables are used, it's a 5-note scale. But the interval quality changes depending on melodic direction. So it's very common. For example, this is a scale which is or a raga which is meant for singing in the middle of the day. The structure goes like this. Sa re ma pa ni sa ni pa ma re sa ni sa re ma pa ni pa ma re sa ni pa. So you actually have the diminished octave lurking inside this. And there, that natural seventh is a one-way street. It only leads upward. If you go Sa re ma pa ni pa. You have just like really violated. And the elderly people in the front row will go. Now, little sociological sideline here. In 1998, I had been invited to give a concert for the music faculty at Bombay University. A classic low pressure gig. There were about 60 people in a room roughly this size, and the closest audience member was approximately as far from me as you are. And I knew who this person was, and he was famous. And the person next to him was also famous. And the person next to him on the other side was also famous. In fact, the whole front row was a bunch of people whose concerts I had seen and had been intimidated by. So no pressure. Everything's cool, right? So a little bit like today, I got my transportation got me there delayed. I got there 40 minutes late and they're like, no problem. We're just getting set up. Thank God. Right? So I did the first piece, which is one raga, 3 songs in one raga. This is a standard way of presenting where a raga will be presented first in a slow song, then in a medium tempo song, then in a fast song. That is returning to that event density increasing over time idea that we had before. And then, perhaps rashly, I had chosen as my second item a song in a raga that differed from the first one only in the interval position of 2 notes, which meant that there was a lot of room for me to make a catastrophic mistake, which I did in the second introductory phrase. I skimmed the note that had belonged to the raga that I had just done, not to the one that I was doing. And that elderly man in front of me went, but Hindustani music concerts go on for in the old times, not so much nowadays, but in those days, they would go on for anywhere between 3 to 8 hours. If you're singing for people for 6 hours, you're gonna fuck things up from time to time. It's guaranteed. So what you do is you touch your earlobe just like that. And that says, I know I made a mistake. And so having made that mistake, I went and touched my earlobe. And that old guy went. See, what I had done was I had demonstrated, A, that I knew that I had made a mistake. And B, that I knew what to do when I made a mistake. And at that point, he was like, instead of like, white boys can't jump. Instead of that, he was like, hey man, shit happens. And it just immediately transformed the whole vibe. And a whole bunch of other elderly people in the front row also visibly relaxed. And I've often thought that if we had something like that in Western music, where if you're playing your repertoire and you mess something up, you just reach up to touch your earlobe real quick, then it's like, it would do a lot towards lessening the emotional temperature of things in the room, right? Right, I'm doing my Philharmonic audition, you know, whole concert, you know, everybody in the BSO. Anyway. Now, once we have the idea that note values can change on the way up and on the way down, and you combine that with the notion that not only does melodic directionality allow you to change interval values, it also allows you to add notes that weren't there on the way up. You then get an entire set of possible ragas, which have 5 notes on the way up and 6 or 7 notes on the way down. So here's an example. That's the ascending scale. Sa, ga, ma, pa, ni, sa. 1, flat 3, sharp 4, 5, natural 7. Sa, ga, ma, pa, ni, sa. Sing that with me. La, 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 la. Now on the way down, la, 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 la. 5 up, 7 down. La 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 la. This is a raga that is meant for performance in the afternoon. And it's an exemplar of a particular family of ragas that all have 5 notes up, 7 notes down that are meant for performance in the afternoon. Change the interval values, you'll get another one of this family of afternoon ragas. So as we sing, one of the things that emerges is a kind of interesting question. For example, am I allowed to go up to the flat second? Or am I only allowed to go down from the flat second? And these form what are called the chalan, the rules of motion of the raga. The verb chalna in Hindi simply means going, to go. So the chalan of a raga, chalan, is how it goes. You know those in literature song? Oh, I'm not sure. How's it go? You know this raga? How does it go? So this raga goes up. And it turns out here you are allowed to go up to the flat second and the flat sixth, but you are not allowed to go up from the flat second or the flat sixth. They are one-way streets. You're allowed to enter them briefly. In much the same way, if you're driving in Boston, you may need to back into a one-way street the wrong way in order to turn around and hope that no one notices you, but you're not allowed to drive all the way down that one-way street. Now, another thing that we notice in raga repertoire is that the notes by themselves are frequently described as having a peculiar inflection. In this case, for example, the minor third of this raga is almost always inflected with a big dive from the sharp fourth. Now, those 2 notes, the flattened second and the flat sixth, are described in the raga chalan as being weak, meaning don't spend a long time on them. One of the first times that I tried to sing this raga when I was in India, and someone had come over to my house and they were like, so show me your singing, right? No pressure. Again, this is just someone who was my age. And I sang this raga, but I hadn't really studied it in depth. And so I liked the sound of that flat six so much that I spent a long time on it. And then he was like, you shouldn't be spending so much time on that. It didn't sound right. And I couldn't pick up on that in the beginning. Now I can pick up on it. And now I'm the one going. Conversely, if I take that same exact scale and I do it and I minimize the importance of the tonic and the fifth, you get an interesting scale that feels some of the time like a major pentatonic scale off the major 7. You can hear when we arrive finally at the tonic or on the fifth there, it's like, whoa! You know, like major plot twist. Had no idea that was gonna happen. And that's one of the things that creates an element of surprise. Sometimes notes will be delayed deliberately for aesthetic effect until some point. It's kind of like the punchline of a joke. You don't tell people the punchline before. Hey, do you know the joke that ends thus and such? Don't do it that way. So here's another afternoon raga that has 5 notes up, 7 notes down. It's the same exact recipe. 1, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Only now, instead of being in that weird kind of like sharp 4 natural 7 Phrygian, I don't know what you would call it in Western modal system. It's now in a Dorian framework. Sa ga ma pa ni sa ni da pa ma pa ga re sa re ni sa ma ma ga ma pa ga ma pa ni da pa pa da ma pa ga ma ga sa. Totally different mood. But all of the melodic exercises that you could do in the first one, you can transpose into the second. And this is one of the degree requirements in the exam for the doctorate of music. They will literally give you a song in one raga and say, you have 5 minutes to turn this into a song in this raga and perform it. And then you have to just take all the material and just go and rearrange it in some way that makes sense and then deliver a convincing rendition right away. This is the tradition, the style genre that I sing is called khayal. Khayal is an Arabic word meaning imagination, and it is an improvisational genre. So the form is I am a khayal singer. The correct technical term is a khayalia. I am a khayalia. And there's a bunch of secondary descriptors, which again, you don't need to know, but they refer to which particular branch of the oral tradition you learned it. If anyone's interested, I'll tell you about that, but it's more detailed than I guarantee. This way lies madness. Now, before I go on, I'm gonna start laying some really complicated and interesting scales on you, but thoughts, questions, inquiries, observations. Tell me something that you've got so far. How can I illuminate your experience? Yes. Yes.
But this idea of like an evening song.
Yes.
Some parts of it, and also how you're doing one concert and you have multiple songs of the runner. So I'm
Yes.
wondering if someone's going to give a performance, if they can only do rock at that time of day, or if they many that have done
It depends on the nature of the performance. If you have been invited to give a lecture demonstration for a bunch of eager Western music students at a conservatory, then you are allowed to do anything you like. If you are in a recording studio and you are recording something that's going to be released as songs of sunset, and it happens to be 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you can sing sunset ragas in the recording studio and no one's going to be that upset. You know, just like you can go in the recording studio and sing Christmas carols in July in time for release in December. But in the traditional context, the idea of a time of day association for the repertoire is one of the ways that helps people kind of keep from interfering with one another in large music concert, which are like festivals. People will go on and do an hour-and-a-half set, and then the next person will come on. And when you know what time you're going to go on, then the pool of material that you can draw from for your presentation is automatically limited. And typically, the way that works in the ecosystem is that the people who have the most power over deciding repertoire are very junior musicians who only know a few things. And therefore they'll get invited to go on and sing what they've got. And then that raga will be off limits for anyone else. And those will tend to be some of the big popular ragas that everyone studies. And then the very big senior musicians who I fully intend to sing this raga and no one will object to me because they're like the major draw. So it's the middle level artists that have to sort of adjust this way or that. Fortunately, the repertoire is huge. There are certain other constraints. There is one raga which is meant exclusively for the final item in a performance. Once you sing that raga, you are not supposed to sing anything else after that. And there is a story involving a bit of psychological warfare between, on the one side, Ustad Fahimuddin Dagar, this scion of an old musical family whose lineage goes back 20 generations, who is scheduled to close a music festival in the Punjab in the 1970s. And on the other side, in the opposite corner, Rais Khan, a highly regarded, younger, technically virtuoso sitarist who was going on before. Rais Khan plays Bhairavi at the end of his set. This is a problem. You are not allowed to do anything else after Bhairavi. What is Fahimuddin Dagar going to do? He has 2 hours to fill. He is backstage fuming because it's like this young upstart, this whippersnapper, this mere child of 40. You get good when you're old. So he's back there going, really? You're doing, what am I supposed to do? And he's pacing backstage and what can you sing? And he finally realized, the books say, all the maestros say, going back 20 generations, nothing can be sung after Bhairavi. But they didn't say that you can't sing Bhairavi after Bhairavi. And he went on stage and he sang a 2-hour-long Bhairavi that completely wiped Rais Khan's performance off the map. You know, in the old days of movies, there was a genre, the Western genre, cowboys, and there would always be some young whippersnapper who would try and challenge an old gunfighter. Come on, I hear your nerves are shot. You can't. Son, put your guns down, go home to your mother. You don't want him. And finally it ends. The young whippersnapper's dead on the floor, and the old gunfighter's sadly carving another notch in his pearl-handled revolver. Well, Fahimuddin Dagar is just carving another notch on the handle of his pearl-handled tambura. Another one killed. So this is an example of this. The ecosystem is as toxic, if not more toxic, than many musical ecosystems in the West. This is a sad realization for many people who come from outside the tradition, who expect that it is filled with very spiritual people whose only aspiration is to make music for the gods. It is filled with internecine jockeying and undercutting and vicious gossip and people stealing gigs from one another and shitty promoters and like rotten sound systems, and the producer's nephew is a tabla player, so he's going to accompany you and all this kind of stuff. And it's just as much of a hassle there as it is anywhere else. So another illusion shattered. Yes.
A lot of the kind of on that track, a lot of the music, it seems like that.
Dude's asking me for more gossip.
No, like, so the lyrics that you were singing have mostly been spiritual, it seems. But how much of there is a division between kind of like sacred music or like sacred lyricism and more, I don't know, the equivalent, maybe like art song type,
These are considered to be art songs. And while the lyrics may refer to either Hindu or Islamic religious traditions, they are, Islamic songs are sung by Hindu musicians and Muslim musicians alike. Hindu songs are sung by Islamic and Muslim musicians alike. And there's no there are separate genres of religious songs, which have greatly constrained avenues for improvisation and much wider opportunities for text presentation.
And are they presented more in a religious context?
There are various types of contexts for religious songs. It is not uncommon to hear a concert of religious songs, or for one or two religious pieces to be sung at the end of a concert as a kind of closing dessert. But it's not like a song sung in church. That's not part of the expectation. Anything else before we get into the final level of crazy? Yes. Slower to faster. Short answer, no. Long answer, it is occasionally possible. I have heard a few musicians who, instead of accelerating to a climax, decelerate to a climax. And I have also heard musicians finish presenting a fast tempo piece in a raga and then present an unusual item in a slower tempo in the same raga by way of saying, here's something that you probably didn't expect to hear. But those are the exceptions rather than the rule. It is generally, however, inside any concert, each raga will be presented in this slow to fast framework. The simplest form is a little bit of unmetered introduction and one song, which goes through the event density increasing over time process. But the standard form in a Kayal presentation would be 2 or 3 songs. The first one sung at an extremely slow tempo, like 12 beats at metronome 18. So that it takes almost a minute to get from one downbeat to the next. And that would occupy anywhere from 25 minutes to an hour. And then a medium tempo song, perhaps 16 beats at metronome 130. And then finally a fast tempo song, 12 beats at metronome 180. And each of those would last for 10 or 12 minutes. And then they would finish, and then the next piece would begin. Typically, the progression is from slower pieces and more profound music in the beginning to lighter pieces and more sort of playful material in the end of the concert. It is also the case that in concerts, the singer will sometimes ask if anyone in the audience has any requests. And this is a trade secret that we do in the realm of Hindustani music. No one is supposed to know this, but the repertoire of material that gets requested is, for the most part, about 20 pieces, 20 ragas. And so if you have those ragas, you have repertoire in those ragas, then you can say, does anyone have any farmaish, any request? And the audience will invariably request one of those 20 ragas, and you can answer it. And this was great for me in establishing my credentials, because it's pretty daring for someone who is not from the Indian tradition to go and give a presentation and then say, does anyone have any farmaish? And someone asks me for something and I go, great, I'll sing it. And that, again, that's like a big surprise for them, because they are not expecting me to have a wide enough repertoire. The one time when I really knocked it out of the park was I was giving a concert in Mumbai in 2013. And as I was singing, I saw an old friend whom I knew from a series of concerts I'd given 10 years before in England. And he came in the room, Jagdish Bhai. And he came in and he nodded to me. I'm in the middle of singing, so but I love the man. And I know that he's going to request this piece, because every time when I was in England performing, he went to all my concerts and he kept requesting it. He said, I really like it when you sing Hem Kalyan. See, and so I knew that when I asked for Farmaish, that he was going to say, sing Hem Kalyan, which is one of the rarest ragas in the repertoire. And so I said, anybody have a Farmaish? And I said, and he said, Hem Kalyan. And I laid it right out for the audience. And they're like, wow, where did that come from? Because that's like really unusual. So that was another moment where I managed to come out feeling really good. Now, as we get into the idea that melodies can have more than one directionality. You then wind up having this idea that certain notes or certain areas of your melodic range can have a particular characteristic, that certain note combinations get used in certain ways. So it's not as simple as using this note on the way up or using this note on the way down. So for example, here's a popular raga. The tambura is now tuned with an open fourth. Sa ga ma da ni da da ni sa ni da ma ga. So it seems pentatonic up, hexatonic down. Sa ga ma da ni sa ni da ma ga. Sa. But there are two ways of going down. One of them is to go down below the fifth, go up through the fifth, and then back down, avoiding the fifth again in order to get down to the tonic. And the other is just to go straight. Here is ascent and descent one. Sa ga ma da ni sa ni da ma ga sa. What I demonstrated before. Here is descent two, with ascent one, or the only ascent, and descent two. Sa ga ma da ni sa ni da ma pa da ga. So the pa, the fifth note of the scale, you never go sa ni da pa. The music police will bust you for that. You have to go sa ni da ma pa da ga. So the fifth is only used in descent, but it's part of an ascending group. So it is quite common for melodies inside this tradition to be going in more than one direction at once. Here is a raga which uses entirely descending phrases on the way up and entirely ascending phrases on the way down. Sa ga re ma ga pa ma da pa ni da sa ni re sa re ni sa da ni pa da ma pa ga ma pa re sa. Sa sa ga re ma ga pa ma da pa ni da sa ni re sa re ni sa da ni pa da ma pa ga ma pa re sa. So seen at the micro level, sa da 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 da. It's all a series of two-note duplets going down, but they are definitely going up. And on the way down, da 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 da. And so that again creates very interesting and very fruitful constraints on improvisation. It's like racing up a down escalator and then jumping over the railing to the up escalator and racing up on the down escalator and going back and forth, and you're mostly I'm just staying in the same place, but it feels like continuous motion of in both directions at once. We also find ragas in which there are particular phrases that get used over and over again to create this kind of attractive melodic hook effect. For example, here is a raga that uses this phrase, da 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 da. All the improvisations will end with some variant of la da 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 da. I'm going to sing you just a few cycles of this in a very slow or slower tempo. Goodbye, same. Gundu Barasaya, Toy Sakala Bana Gundi. Meaning, I am searching for my love in the forest. So this is an example where you basically have a mixed Lydian and Ionian scale. Sa, re, ga, ma, pa, da, ni, sa, ni, da, pa, ma, sa. But the motion uses a pentatonic sa, ga, ma, pa, ni, sa on the way up. But again, you never actually hear that. Sa, ni, da, ni, pa, da, ma, pa. The sharp four is used there. Ma, pa, da, ma, pa. And then ga, ma, da, pa, da. So the Western temptation would be to harmonize that. Ooh, no, a subdominant to dominant cadence. And interestingly, when there were various Westerners during the colonial period, various Westerners in living in India would take some of these Indian melodies and try harmonizing them, and they invariably sounded like not very good Western music. Because all of the melodic juice, which is rests in the curves and the ornamentation, got lost and instead got replaced by these harmonies, which were rather banal and predictable. So this is something, if you're a composer and you're trying to figure out how to do this, this is an area that requires considerable care in order to make it work. Now, before we close, I've got just a few more minutes. I want to open it up to questions, and I want to sing a little bit of Bhairavi. Yes.
I hear a lot of the inspirations, like Bob Dylan, like the 90s. Do you feel like the crossover of, because the fact like, you know, in our generation, we have like social media, we have like access to like.
This stuff is everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah. Well, also Beyonce, Hindustani is like Beyonce is actually mainstay, so she sings in that in air recordings. But when do you feel like the popularity of it being exposed around the world, not even before it was like coin world music, like when do you think that it became like popular? Because I feel like there's a lot of 60s influence in the 60s and 90s.
Demographically speaking, Indian music began making an impact in the West in the 1960s. But
Yeah,
the first time that musicians from India were heard in the West, as opposed to by Western colonialists, was in the Paris Exposition in 1899, which was the same place that Debussy heard the Javanese gamelan. And so Indian musicians have been touring and traveling in the West since then. And Ravi Shankar's older brother, Uday Shankar, had a dance troupe that performed throughout Europe and the United States in the 1930s. So Ravi Shankar, as a kid, went to the Cotton Club and heard Duke Ellington and heard Django Reinhardt and heard all these people, you know, and so he soaked that up. And then with the increase in immigration from India and Pakistan into the West, there became more and more opportunities for the music to exist in its own kind of organic way. That is, as opposed to Westerners trying to do it or adopting it as a kind of flavor, there would be an opportunity for some local amateur classical musicians in your neighborhood to give a house concert in someone's living room, and you could go and check that out. And that began really blossoming by the 50s and 60s. And then it started to become noticeable to people outside the Indian community going forward from there.
Yeah, 'cause I was gonna say, Irving Berlin, Blue Skies.
Yep.
You hear that still?
Yeah. And some of that comes from klezmer, right? And so there's a lot of these things that go back and forth because there's Arabic influence, the Islamic diaspora is there, and Indians, like the Roma people, are originally from Gujarat and Rajasthan in India, and they went to Europe and became known as the Gypsies. So all the so-called gypsy scales have their origins in Hindustani tradition and in Indian folk tradition. So
I also hear like talking about the times today.
yeah.
Slavery are enslaved.
Yep.
So,
Because again, there was a strong Arabic influence in West Africa, thanks to Islamic missionaries that had gotten there.
supposedly it has been researched, but
Yeah.
there were people that were from South Asia and also the
Yep.
East that were enslaved because they
Yep.
received them
Yep.
African
Yep.
West Africa.
It's the whole thing demands a lot of study and interest because it's very deep in the ecosystem. The roots are tangled in very productive and beautiful ways. Yes.
So, I think, I don't know if we're gonna be discussing Carnatic music much, but, we were discussing a little bit about Hindustani
Yeah.
and Carnatic music last week.
Yeah.
Just as an introduction, how much of, Carnatic music is, like, how much crossover is there with Hindustani music?
There are a few musicians who are competent in both genres. The notation syllables, sa re ga ma pa da ni sa, are common to both, but the system of organization of scales is very different. The Carnatic system is extremely hyper-classified. They love classification and they are very good at it, and they have developed systems of classification with surprisingly little ambiguity and surprisingly few things that are left out. And Hindustani classification systems are hopelessly weird and fragmented. What this means on an individual expressive level is that Carnatic music generates child prodigies at an astonishing rate because kids, when they're at an age of advanced neuroplasticity, can learn entire systems very, very rapidly if the systems are codified and orderly. And so it's very common for there to be 10 or 11 or 12-year-old musicians performing on stage at the highest possible level in Carnatic music. But there have been like 3 child prodigies in the entire history of Hindustani music. And like usually, I remember getting a record by one of the singers and it says, at age 46, he is the prime light of the younger generation. And they have like the really old guys. Sometimes you'll go to a concert by someone who's like 90 years old and there's not much voice left, but you hear a lot of wisdom coming out there. And it's because the system is very organic and it's never really been adequately shoved into pedagogical boxes. It makes it harder to teach because one teacher's style is not the same as another teacher's style, and there's no fixed repertoire. There's a concept, the propaedeutic, a propaedeusis is a beginner's piece, a pedagogical piece. A lot of people who do Western classical music, there are little studies that you have that were designed to do this, an etude. And there's nothing like that in Hindustani music, but there are books of propaedeutic material and Carnatic repertoire. Yes.
In that way, does it share more in common with like Persian music and even like Arabic music?
Yes.
As a southern neighbor?
Yes. But on the other hand, the overall musical aesthetic being a strongly drone-oriented aesthetic, and the presence of the drone is much more common, and the return to the familiar is common across. Event density does not increase over time as much in Carnatic music. There, the formula is a little different. Yes.
How are the
Is that in the beginning, someone saying or needs to place in sections.
Yes.
Wondering if that's the only vowel that it's-
It's generally considered to be the default vowel when you sing and when you present. And a lot of attention was given by my teacher to me on getting my ah to sound just right. But some singers prefer different vowels, and it's not uncommon. For example, the great Hindustani singer Bhimsen Joshi used a kind of modified oh, and that was his vowel. And the minute that you heard that, you recognized that was him. But the ah is the default. Extended melismatic passages are heard on all other vowels and also semivowels, diphthongs, and nasals. So, for example, that last piece that I did, I might say, so doing it all on the nasal, which is the weirdest effect. And sometimes when they finally release the nasal and the vowel sort of returns, it's like the audience goes, holy shit, he was singing all along. Like, what happened? And I've heard like an entire room full of people burst into applause because of that, because it's just this really exciting moment where the music sort of blossoms. All right, I'm going to sing one more piece. This is a rhythmic song in the raga Bhairavi. This is what is meant for the final item. And so this is how we close. After that, if you have questions, come up and ask me. Na 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 da na. Da na na da 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 And thank you for letting me share this music with you. If you have more questions, I know you all have to go. You've probably got more things to do, but if you have more questions, I'll hang out here for a few minutes and I'd love to talk to you. Thank you for sharing this music with me. It's some of my favorite music in the world to sing, and it's a great honor to be able to share it with you. I'm very fortunate to have learned with a great master and to be able to pass this music along to people who are interested.
Thank you.